Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Suchon.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we're staying in San Diego, and our goal this week is to laugh and enjoy life and talk about weird news, because there's a lot of different forms of journalism and a lot of them get a lot of different clicks, and sometimes the weird news is what we like best, and that's the type of stuff that we need in our lives. Our guest is David Moye. He attended San Diego State in the 80s into the early 90s. He has been described as the Wizard of Weird. He's had a lot of different fascinating jobs: journalism, PR, marketing. He worked for a puppet theater. These days, he primarily writes for the Huffington Post, where he specializes in weird news and dumb crimes. David, welcome to the Where You At podcast.
Oh, it's nice to be here. It's nice to meet here.
Yeah. All right, David. So I was trying to figure out where we even start, but let's just go with this. Why does humor matter? What does humor mean to you? Why is it so important that you seek out and find humor in your life and write about humor?
At the risk of sounding like I'm about to do an essay, but the fact is, humor is an elixir that allows human communication to go through. It's also an effective way to be honest, express hostility in a way that kind of works. And so with humor basically allows us to kind of maybe say things or get into discussions that might be a little bit more uncomfortable if we took it as seriously as we could. Plus, it also I'd say it's an entry point that isn't as intimidating as, say, if you're bringing in the hard facts right away. Obviously, there are places where it works and where it doesn't, as we're seeing over the past week with the terrible going on in Israel and with every and just the world event. So there's some things that obviously where humor isn't going to work, but there are lots of places where it's still necessary.
When it comes to just weird news, when did this begin, and when did you realize this is what I want to write about? I want to write about weird, obscure, unusual things.
The thing that we have to remember, though, about weird news, just to be clear, I often describe weird news as news that raises your eyebrows or makes your mouth drop. But remember that when you're taking Journalism 101 and the teacher's coming out and they're doing the what is news, the example that they always use is a weird news one. It's it's not news if a dog bites a man, but if a man bites a dog, and that's a weird news story. So basically, all news in some form is a little bit weird, because otherwise it would be olds, not news, or we wouldn't be writing it. Weird can be gory, it can be brutal, it can be but but every story that makes the news is unusual in some capacity, otherwise we wouldn't be writing about it. For me, I've just always been, growing up, I was just always one of those guys that was into things like Ripley's Believe It or Not, studying all sorts of, there used to be a really terrible, and I mean this in the most affectionate way, terrible newspaper called the Weekly World News. That would they later admitted it was made up, but they'd have stories about Bad Boy, who he's endorsing for the 1980 presidential election. Oh, he's going for Reagan now. Oh, that's good. And so you read some of that stuff, and it just, weird news kind of just, it cracks you up in some capacity, and also it raises questions on why is the person doing that. And so I just always kind of been into that. At State, at SDSU, I did more entertainment news rather than, I was on the Daily Aztec entertainment section, which was it's still probably one of the best jobs I've ever had. But I didn't necessarily do officially weird news until later. But every story that I've done, even when I was covering garden club parties for the Rancho Santa Fe Review, would have some aspect of weirdness or unusual, some little thing to kind of, raise the eyebrows or make the mouth drop.
Full disclosure for everyone listening to this podcast, we're probably going to bounce around a whole lot more this week than I normally do. I have a few notes, not as many notes as I normally have, because I just want to kind of riff with David here. Because based on what you just said, I'm thinking about, we go to dinner, we go to drinks with our friends and our family members. You sit around and you go, oh my gosh, you're never going to believe what happened to me today. Or you're never going to believe what I saw. And that's what kind of gets our attention, makes for lively conversations. And so I'm wondering about just
when that happens, because a lot of times they'll say, hey, I read a weird story, and they'll go into it and they're at the dinner party and everyone's laughing and everything. And then I have to kind of say, you know where you got that from, right? Did you write that? Yeah, I did. So I'm kind of like, I used to be great at dinner parties until I started, and then I stopped. And then I had to learn not to insist on taking credit.
Where do you find weird stories? What do you read? What do you scour? How often are you seeking out weird stories, and how often do they just find you?
It's a little bit of both. Like sometimes, like these days, a lot of times what I'm doing is doing a lot of the political reactions. There's a lot of for HuffPost, which is sort of a center-left publication, the readers definitely love hearing about some of the Republicans who can't figure out who's going to be their Speaker of the House, whether they want the Speaker of the House. And, there are a lot of people on social media who are basically bomb throwers, saying things to kind of like get effect and get their tweets and everything. So, I find Twitter is, despite it not being as user-friendly as it was before Elon Musk held it, I still find it's a good source for weird news. Fark is a great, you go, there are aggregators. Fark has a lot of like reader sort of contributed stories that will come from, local publications around the country and world. And then, I can do my own aggregation on it. Sometimes I get pitched an original story. Somebody will say, hey, do you want to interview a guy who's been collecting every toenail clipping he's had for the last 20 years? And it's like, yeah, I do, as a matter of fact. So a lot of times they come up in different places and everything. And to me, a lot of it is not so much what the story is, but what's the lead that I can write with it, or what's the headline that I can write with it. Because a lot of times the spin isn't, the story might be straightforward, other than you're doing a funny head and doing a funny lead that sort of kind of gets into it. So it's a little bit of, yes, I'm weird, and it's more like maybe weird as a seasoning.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I really want to get into like the art of writing about these types of stories. Do you normally just write something somewhat straightforward and then go back and look for the puns and the funny things? Or do you want the puns and the funny things that gets people attention? Do those come to you right away?
It comes to me right away. It's an intuitive thing. I have no I have no interest in to be honest, for a long time, I had to be kicking, screaming. I had to be dragged kicking and screaming into doing a summary lead, because I felt like, that's the most basic thing. And then when there were times when somebody needs, there's a story that's breaking, it's a little like more serious, but they need someone to write it. And I'm the guy that's there, and I'll do a summary lead to kind of like, tell the story. Other times, you just kind of look for the hook, the connecting tissue. Now, you were talking about humor before. A lot of times, like, the definition of humor is making a connection that other people, it's making a connection that you didn't realize it was there. That can be a pun, that can be making a kind of a reaction to something. Like today I wrote a story about how Biden is joining Truth Social, Trump's platform, in order to kind of get in order to kind of like meet voters at their place. And I thought it was funny, considering how badly Truth Social is done. It's only, in 2 years, it only has 2 million followers, whereas like even Twitter, with people threatening to leave, still has 450 million followers. And so the idea, I originally wrote it took Nixon to get to China. It took Nixon to go to China. Maybe it took Biden to save Truth Social. That was my original lead. And then I had to think about it and go, okay, there is probably nobody there's nobody under the age of 40 that's going to necessarily get that reference. So I ended up doing a slightly different reference, but making a slightly different thing, but making it the point that Biden's probably going to be the one to save Truth Social for Trump, even if he hates it and everything. So a lot of times it's like, what's the emotional reaction? And now this is sort of a sideline thing, but it comes with writing my stories. Sometimes I get pitched by publicists. I don't always use stories by publicists, but I'm I'll listen to them. And sometimes I've had to tell publicists, you're aiming for my brain. And that's just a glorified executive secretary. If you want to get me interested in your story, aim for my heart, aim for my gut, aim for parts lower, but not my brain. Because it's all about, and what I'm doing is it's all about moving the reader emotionally, especially in this day now where old days, newspaper editors, in their pipe smokes and leather patch jackets would be, we'll decide what the news is for people. We're doing a service. And now people, and with the rise of the internet over the last 20, 25 years, people decided what they wanted to read. And a lot of times they're clicking on what is going with their emotions. And that was kind of the interesting thing. There would never, if it hadn't been for the internet, there would never be like a full-blown weird news section for HuffPost, because what they found out the hard way, with what newspaper editors and stuff found out the hard way after the internet came, is that people weren't picking the stories they were putting on their front page about, this this bill here, or this, boring other bill thing, or this other policy thing. They were picking stories about, the guy that had the largest collection of toenail clippings in the world. That's, and the readers, once the readers decided what they could read, they were wanting to read the weird stuff.
Speaking of weird, let's go back. Who is Ruth Norman, and what was it about Ruth Norman that made her interesting, that kind of launched this interest in weird news?
If you Wikipedia, Ruth Norman is also known as the Archangel Uriel, and she was a woman that lived for like 94 years. She was like born in 1900, and she lived in La Mesa, down the street from me, for a few years. And she, besides being this old lady, she believed that she was the reincarnation of the Archangel Uriel, and that she was one of the people that was to help the Space Brothers come down to Earth. And they were all going to put 33 spaceships on top of each other in a remote area of Hamul. And they were going to somehow build a 76-foot tall power tower, which looked a lot like, I was reading Freud at the time, a phallic symbol there. And, it was all this place that they were going to, like, apparently build all this stuff in, the aliens were going to build all this stuff in Hamul on, when I found out, I was watching public access television, which was like the early version of YouTube. They do these reenactments, all these people in this church, or they called it a science, an organization. They would do all these reenactments of past lives and such. And so I saw this one time on TV, and my wife said, "Oh yeah, she lives down the street." And it was like, so the next day I'm knocking on the door, and she didn't answer. Instead, there was this 6-foot tall guy in a bicentennial pattern Speedo who answered the door and said, "No, I'm not her son. I'm her polarity." And it's like, oh, So anyway, I actually invited her to come and speak to our high school class. And I think my teacher still hasn't forgiven me, because, the guy, the guy was coming, he was talking about all this crazy stuff about a green fireball eating New York City, and that's what made him decide to come to San Diego, which, I've heard that story before, but and so I just ended up following them for a while, and I ended up about 15 years later, getting a job for a wire service that specialized in weird news, which would service it to like radio stations, TV stations, wacky morning DJs. Jay Leno and David Letterman would use our stuff. And when I was getting hired, I was like, they were saying, "Yeah, we do weird news. Do you understand weird news?" And I happened to mention, "Well, do you know the Archangel Uriel?" And they like held up all this literature that they had from her. And I'm like, do you need to really interview anybody else? And so basically the fact is that there was a woman that would drive around with a giant Cadillac, and an old school Cadillac with a spaceship on the top. And, you're 15 years old. That gives you something to shoot for when you're older. If I do well, I ended up never writing in it, but when the UT did an interview on me about 5-10 years ago, I did get to stand by it, which is still a bucket list moment for me.
So you're a San Diego kid, you go to San Diego State. What was it about remaining home and wanting to go to San Diego State that drew you and made you decide you want to live in San Diego forever?
San Diego's a great city, and it's really hard to leave. I've always been kind of a homebody. There, to be honest, I think there was a little bit of a towny aspect. I didn't necessarily ever think the option of that I could. I mean, I had a 2.7 at Grossmont. I was always really good in the classes I cared about, and not so good at the classes that I didn't care about. And so, I thought I could get into SDSU. It's school. I probably couldn't get in now. I mean, it's but at the time I thought I could. My friends were here. I was thinking kind of like sort of short term. I do feel like, and I've seen this. I'm working now with people that have gone to NYU, Columbia, and everything. And I feel like at first I thought I'd be intimidated, but San Diego State gave me a really good foundation in terms of journalism, and it was practical journalism. It's like writing it and what do you do, and not like the theoretical aspects of journalism I'm not totally into. It's like you tell the story, you do it right, you try and make sure that you're accurate and not basically like the old Hippocratic oath, not doing any harm. And SDSU gave me a great training with learning the basics of media law, learning the basics of doing the different types of leads. I found that the teachers that I had were very, very and very enthusiastic. I learned a lot there. And the Daily Aztec, I mean, that was such a great experience to have all these people passionate about interviewing the janitor of the sewage thing after this thing breaks, really passionate about covering stories and everything. I was doing entertainment. So while other people were covering like the sewage break in El Conquistador or whatever I was like interviewing what music acts were coming into town or interviewing, mostly a lot of music acts. But whereas a lot of my friends on the staff were like trying to interview Soundgarden and the acts that were really hip, I was like interviewing like the members of Lawrence Welk, because that's what I was into. I interviewed, I think, a skater for the Barbie on Ice Capade show one time, just because I thought it would be really funny. And I thought that our readers, I didn't think any college kid from SDSU is going to go to Ice Capade's Barbie on Ice, but they might read something if they see a cheesy photo. And a lot of times I was right. I mean, I think one of our biggest stories was when I got a chance to interview Mel Blanc, the voice of Bugs Bunny and Barney Rubble. And, and I got to interview Donny Osmond. And so I was like, and I saw people reading my Donny Osmond story. And it's like, it kind of gave me a hint that, okay, I'm not necessarily doing the number one acts that are supposed to be popular, but people are reading my stories. So what does this say,
Tell us more about this company that you work for. I believe it's called Wireless Flash, in which you alluded to, you just put together these weird news stories and, Jay Leno, Jon Stewart, David Letterman. Tell us about just the foundation of finding that job and what it meant to you.
Well, I was out of work for about 5 months. And then one day I ended up the day after the OJ verdict, I ended up getting an interview with this place, Wireless Flash, which is just a 2-room office up in Hillcrest, and I lived in Ocean Beach. And I just what they did was they were originally part of the Copley chain, and they separated a few years before I joined because of a scandal. My editor, Pat Glenn, who I think also went to SDSU, had written a story where he interviewed Princess Di's gynecologist and ended the story with the line, "At your cervix, Your Majesty." And the people at Copley, which owned, it was very conservative. They owned the UT. I think I don't all know the machinations and everything. I don't think they're involved, but they owned it, and they were very conservative, and they had a big tizzy about the pun. And so he ended up buying out the publication, taking it separately, and managed to get it out to 800 media outlets were subscribing for it. And a lot of them were morning DJs. And a lot of times you could tell it was really interesting, because sometimes people would call with these wacky morning DJs from Altoona or something. They would call with like right after they got off shift, and you could kind of see them switching from their voices back into something kind of a little bit normal. It was they were doing it. So I would be like coming up with like weird surveys. I'd be interviewing weird people. So it's kind of scary now, because I think a lot of like the people that have been there are people who I interviewed who I knew were total crackpots back then, who we gave press to because they were crackpots, who now, over the last 8 years, I don't know if you know this, but things have been kind of weird. These people ended up being like respected, and like somehow we're able to turn this into we would make fun of them, and then all of a sudden, somehow in the last 8 years, they became respected authorities. So I would interview people who saw Bigfoot. I would interview people who saw aliens. I would interview people who, basically, people from all walks of life. I interviewed a lot of psychics, and that was good for me because I actually worked as a phone psychic when I got out of school at SDSU. I worked as a phone psychic, and all the interviewing skills I learned through Journalism 310 made me such a really good phone psychic. It was like I was really able to connect with people to the point where I guess they believed I was psychic. So
did you ever start to believe yourself was psychic? Did you ever nail it so much?
I've gone back and forth on whether or not I am. I'm actually working on a podcast right now with my boss at HuffPost called My Friend Dave Thinks He's Psychic, where we're going to kind of test whether or not I really am psychic by actually doing all sorts of different things to actually test whether it's ability. Because the problem is that maybe there's something to it, but there's also like all sorts of flim-flammery with it. It's like a lot of people basically take advantage of other people, and there might be some intuition, because I can look at the trailer of a Rob Schneider movie and know it's going to suck. So I know psychic ability exists. It's just a matter of whether it can be verified, and it isn't just like it worked now, but it didn't work yesterday.
I'm asking this next question because it also involves another job that you had. Who gives better advice, palm readers or phone psychics?
They're the same thing, pretty much. One of the coworkers taught me how to break open a blueberry muffin and read it basically like a tarot card. It's kind of like, it's all pretty much the same thing. With the palm reading, I found that I like doing it just because, you can make a lot of assumptions. Oh, this person doesn't wash their hands as much, so maybe I can this means they're loose, they're open-minded. There are all sorts of ways you can kind of make an assumption based on things, and it's kind of like, it isn't, a lot of times it isn't about predicting the future. It's like convincing them that you understand where they're at right now, and then you can say, well, based on where you're at right now, this could mean this, or it could mean that, and could carries a lot of weight here, does a lot of the lifting.
I've always been fascinated in just when I write something or when somebody writes something, and just the reach that it has. And so when you were talking earlier about the wacky FM DJs and Jay Leno and David Letterman, and I know that I would watch those monologues and I would just think, how in the world did they even like find this? How is this even like a thing? And I'm wondering for you, your, what's the right word? Just sort of like appreciation for, I find this thing, I write this thing, and then it ends up wherever it is, it ends up, and how just interesting that is to you.
Oh, I get fascinated. I love seeing where it kind of goes. With there have been times where I've seen, stories that I wrote, get quoted by a lot of different places. There was one publication, the Daily Mail, though, that took one of my stories. I got an exclusive one time about I interviewed the world's fattest mom, where she was the fattest when she gave birth. She was 500 pounds when she gave birth. And we were doing a story because there was another woman calling herself the fattest mom, and she was fatter than this woman was when she gave birth, but the weight that she gave birth at wasn't as fat as. So it's like, what does this mean? How do you determine? Was it fat when you gave birth? But then the woman, Donna Simpson, said, it doesn't matter. I'm going on a diet anyway. And so we said, oh, this is great. The world's fattest mom is going on a diet. So we did a story about that. It was great. And then my boss says, hey, this is back when we did blogging, when we allowed people to blog, HuffPost, everyone can blog. And so we let her blog, and the first blog was okay, it was great. The second blog was legendary though, because I think it pretty much, and I could find it if someone cares, but it's basically, she was saying, a lot of people suggested to me if I wanted to lose weight that I should try crack cocaine. And basically she went into the whole thing about how she tried it and stuff. And the article summarized, oh, so if you're looking to crack to lose weight, it might not work for you. It didn't for me. And it was like, I don't think she blogged that much more after that. And I don't think it was because we necessarily said don't blog anymore, as much as it is that most people, this happens a lot, oh, I want to be a columnist. And it's like, and then they only have one column in them. This happens a lot. People that think, I want to be a columnist. Oh, can you actually write a column? Hey, you didn't say that.
Okay, so that's actually really good. So let's see if we can try to make this up.
One.
Try to offer some practical advice to college students, because speaking of just like blogs, and I know that blogs are like a really old thing though, but I remember when blogs got really popular in the early 2000s, a big thing was like, I'm a sports fan and I think that the manager is dumb, or I think the general manager is dumb, and so I'm going to create a website that's like fire and then insert the name of whoever I want fired. And they come out guns blazing, 3, 4, 5 columns, and then they're just run out of material. At that point, they're like, yeah, fire them again, or keep firing. They just run out of material. And so,
or they do the apologetic blogs. Sorry, I haven't blogged for a while. Which is I love even more, because it assumes that somebody's been like waiting there going, I'm refreshing, I'm not seeing anything new.
So what is advice for anyone, whether it's a student now or someone who wants to write and become a writer, in terms of just what it means and the type of dedication you must have to your writing craft?
Okay, well, the thing that I always try and stress to young writers is be willing to write about other people than yourself. And because the thing is that a lot of times people I want to be a writer. And then all they're so used to writing blogs that they have, it's all about them. Or like if they I know this often happens when somebody interviews a celebrity for the first time in their life, they'll make the story about how they interviewed the celebrity, which is great for the Christmas newsletter. But it's kind of like you want to act like you've been there before, so I don't think writing the story about writing the story is necessary. I think you can get away with that once. I tell writers, a lot of times with college students, the biggest problem that they have is that they're so busy that they don't always think to take advantage of if somebody in a position of them is willing to help. People will either they'll put it on the back burner and they won't take advantage of it, or they forget to take advantage of it, or they'll try too hard. Like, oh, well, this guy liked my stuff, maybe I'll be editor next week. No, I mean, the most I can do is I can do this. So the thing is that a lot of times, like, I'll recommend. I'm happy to mentor students. I'm happy to mentor young writers and everything. The one thing though that I ask is that if I give you a lead to somebody that might hire you, follow up immediately while it's still fresh in their mind. Don't say, well, I'm waiting for this or I'm waiting for that. Because I mean, it's a waste of my time if I'm recommending you and then they're not going to hear from you for 2 or 3 months or something. So take advantage of if an older person in your career is willing to do you a solid, then take advantage of it right away.
When it comes to doing interviews, so let's focus more on, okay, you're not just writing about yourself, you're doing interviews. What, especially when it comes to celebrities, it can be really intimidating. You can just be in awe of them, and it's hard to kind of get used to the idea that this person is known and I'm not known, but I need to get some information. What is your advice? What was your strategy for kind of getting over that?
Well, I didn't have Wikipedia, but what I had was a large number. I have a big brain filled with useless trivia nonsense. So there were a lot of times when I would be so like, I'm not gonna, if Jurassic Park is coming out, I'm not gonna be able to get, like, and I'm talking about the first one, I'm not gonna be able to get the big stars of that, but I might be able to get the extra who gets ripped up by a dinosaur. Or I might be, and I ended up interviewing Richard Schiff, who was basically a small time actor then and later was on The West Wing. And so there were a lot of times when I'd be able to recognize an obscure character actor, or I'd be able to recognize something in a press release that was something that I could hook on. A lot of it is like finding that one little thing, like with a celebrity. Something that's sometimes good is if you have a legitimate, like one of my coworkers, we were just talking about this. Somebody sent me some Judy Garland perfume. It's like perfume, just like Judy Garland did, because I'm putting together a weird gift guide. And I sent it to my coworker who formerly worked at Wireless Flash, because she used to interview. She one time interviewed Lorna Luft, and Lorna Luft was promoting, that's Liza Minnelli's sister, Judy Garland's daughter. She was promoting some kind of event that she was doing, which is great. That's the last sentence in the story. And instead, she spent the whole time talking about working with Michelle Pfeiffer on Grease 2, or you'd get some like really obscure sort of thing. Like Jonathan Taylor Thomas hated talking with me because I brought up, oh yeah, you were in one of the Brady Kid movies. Or you were one of the Brady movies that came out like in the late 90s when they were trying to bring back the thing. He's like, yeah, I was trying to talk about this serious thing here. Yeah. So did you like Craig? It's so a lot of times it's like finding something obscure, or a lot of times like celebrities and people, they're just as insecure. Well, I'm not going to assume you're as insecure, but that you're insecure, but they're just as insecure as I am. So you just, you find something to like about them. And if you find something obscure to like about them, like, there's this one impressionist that I interviewed one time, because impressionists are great during election years, because you ask them, well, who's going to be easier for you, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, and so you can get some great stuff. And I talked to this one guy, and I remember that he had done like this little monologue back in 1979 on this show called Solid Gold, and he was like, oh my God. And it rested. He was a little standoffish at the beginning of the interview, but after that, he was almost too happy to talk with me, because I kept getting those hey, how about an update? Hey. So you find something obscure about them that you appreciate is kind of a good way to go. And a lot of times if you ask about the actual work, and not necessarily, if you can find a way to get an anecdote about what they're promoting that brings them into it, that's the best thing, because otherwise you have, as a writer, have to do everything you can to avoid it sounding like a commercial. But so trying to get an anecdote is probably the other advice I'd say with interviewing celebrity.
Well, speaking of trying not to make it sound like a commercial, you mentioned a weird gift guide. Tell us more about working on this weird gift guide and what you seek out for this.
Well, for HuffPost, I do. It's kind of a mitzvah that my boss gives me, where he lets me write along with my regular work. I do 5 weird gift guides for HuffPost, like on weird Christmas gifts, weird Halloween costumes or tasteless Halloween costumes. I have weird Valentine's gifts, weird Mother's Day gifts, weird Father's Day gifts, and so you're basically just trying to get stuff that's like really weird. I don't want to, tacky, tasteless. I don't want to necessarily say some of those things, but like there was one year where there was a lamp that's basically shaped like a gun. And it's like one of those things where it's like, it's really tacky. And yet I know that a lot of people clicked on it just because it was so tacky. So I a lot of times I'm looking for like really bizarre gifts, things that are, uses that you can't really imagine, like people that are solving a problem that you wouldn't expect. And then I'm also doing a celebrity gift guide, which is like guide to celebrity products, where celebrity is posing with their product. A lot of times those things are kind of sort of commercial, but I really enjoy watching the celebrities, especially people that are just starting their fame, try and like look normal standing next to a bottle of whiskey that they probably never saw before this whole time and everything. So that's those are some of the things that I do. They're kind of like little things that I can just, they're visual guides. Here's the gift, here's a little funny little segment about it, and then you go on to the next thing. They're just kind of it's sort of it's a part of what I do with work, but it's as much of a hobby as it is an assignment.
What about songwriting? Tell us about just like what type of songwriting you do and why you do it. How much of that is hobby and how much of that is work?
It's pretty much a hobby at this point. The big work I did was Universal Islands of Adventure theme park hired me like 20 years ago to write 5 superhero songs for their Marvel theme park. And that my roommate and I, we had a great time. I mean, he had all the comic books he had all these Marvel comic books that had all the history. It's basically the Bible. And I had, I'm really good at the short form. I can write stories that are 400 words at max. Perfect. I can write a song really easy. It's one of those things where my brain works sort of that way. And, I mean, if I could find a job where I wrote songs, jingles all time, I mean, I love my job now, but any opportunity that I have to write songs, I would definitely go for.
Well, you mentioned college radio. You were at KCR. What are things how KCR benefited you and how KCR can continue to benefit current students?
Well, KCR gave me, I was so happy to do like the midnight to 6 shift or the midnight to 2 shift, just because they had all these records that, remember, this is before Spotify and YouTube put everything online. And if you hear about an album, you hear about Miles Davis' Bitches Brew, or you hear about these albums but they're not available in easily accessible forms. And all of a sudden they're all at this radio station. And so, I mean, I was able to beef up my musical education. I mean, I was interviewing a lot of jazz artists at SDSU, when I was working on the Aztec. And so, I'd have to listen to that stuff. And the people at KCR would be nice enough to let us bring in music to the station and play it. And I'm really grateful that my coworkers at the SDSU Daily Aztec didn't object as much as they probably should have to some of the music that not just me, but that other people were playing and things, but I got a real education on music. And when I was interviewing a lot of these celebrities and everything, I got a good education both on like writing stories, but also on their mindset. Like since I had a goal of being some kind of entertainment, I think the journalism that I do is entertainment, and being able to interview people that were in a position higher than me, even if it's just 1 or 2 questions at the end, was a beautiful thing.
All right, I'm going to start to wrap things up here, but there's a couple other notes that I've taken from our conversation. And when you mentioned, well, I got hired by this theme park, and it made my brain think, how do you find work? What are places that people should go and look to in order to find these types of jobs that may not be posted on the traditional job sites and that you may not initially think would be a job?
Most companies that are like major, like I know that BuzzFeed, which owns HuffPost now, has a job board, and I think you should go them. Journalism jobs, I found some luck there. I haven't used it for 10 years because I've been at HuffPost for 10 years. A lot of times in San Diego, it's a little harder because it's not a media. It's hard to be a journalist in San Diego. It's not. I mean, you have some really great journalists, world-class journalists who are working like getting paid $35 for a story from, a community newspaper, because that's what they can do. I mean, this is where networking really matters. You stick with people, you try and help where you can, you don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. But I did have some luck when I got laid off from a marketing. I did a marketing job briefly. I got laid off during the height of the second Bush recession, the one 2008, 2009 and stuff. And I only that's when I first went on social media, and I went and I contacted a lot of my coworkers or former people that I knew and just sort of made contacts. But now one of the people that I made contact with was a guy named Buck Wolf, who I had known from because he worked at ABC, and he was a subscriber to Wireless Flash. He had also been laid off around the same time I had, and we were discussing stuff, and I gave him a tip for a connection that was better for him than was for me. And it worked out great. 6 months later, he got hired by AOL to put together a weird news section. And I was one of the first writers. I mean, I like to think it's like this elite team of weird news journalists, because we had a dumb crime guy. We had me who could cover everything. We had a UFO journalist, a guy named Lee Spiegel, who man, he died recently at the age of 70, and it was really hard. But he was like the first. He was a guy who actually held the first UFO conclave at the United Nations, and so we had this Justice League, this Avengers of weird news journalists at AOL, and then a year later, HuffPost, AOL bought HuffPost, and they were doing, everyone at AOL was freelance and got kind of like, well, we're going to go with other people, but the weird news guys, because HuffPost didn't have a section, stayed there. So I wouldn't have gotten this job if I hadn't helped this other guy out, my future boss. If I hadn't helped him get a job, I probably wouldn't be working at HuffPost 11 years running. And I mentioned this before we started taping. The benefits of having a New York job and a San Diego address are you can't underestimate how great that is.
The thing that I'll piggyback on from my own experience that David just talked about is that I spent about 15 months or so, and I'm using air quotes, which people listening on a podcast can't see, where I was freelancing or I was in between jobs. And honestly, one of the main things that I did is that I hung out with other people who were unemployed or other people who were freelancing. And we would go hiking, we would get coffee, we would get drinks, we would get lunch, we would just sit around and just brainstorm. We would just brainstorm ideas. And sometimes it was, hey, that's really good for you. And sometimes, hey, that's really good for me. And so we would just get around and just talk to each other. And I think this goes ultimately back to networking. But I think the lesson in there too is pay it forward. Think about others just as much as yourself and how often that comes back around to help you when you are thinking, hey, you know what? That'd be really good for this person that I know. And how, I don't know, maybe I'm getting on my soapbox here, but you throw it out into the universe and something comes back to you.
It's hard when you're like out of work. You're very self-focused. I totally understand that. If you can kind of think that we're all in this together, it can be a good thing. And, especially with journalism changing. I mean, but to be honest, I mean, people have been predicting journalism's demise for 50 years. I mean, ever since I got my, So I mean, but you have to stick together. I think it's a rough thing. Also, you can't get mad at other people's success. This was something that happened really big. Like when I was at SDSU, somebody would get like a really good internship at a place everybody wanted. And you're going, well, why not me? And you can't. You can't get mad about other people's success. It has nothing to do with you. It just holds you back. It doesn't help you actually grow or whatever.
All right, David, we like to wrap things up by having our alums brag about other alums. And so whoever you want to, mention, someone who went to San Diego State, who you're proud of what they have done or what they're doing, brag about another Aztec who is making us proud.
I was really proud of the basketball team last year. I think Tony Gwynn Jr. does a really good job on the thing is, he's got sincerity. I get really impressed when I'm listening to him on the radio and stuff, because I mean, he just has something that you can't fake, a certain amount of sincerity. Those are the two that kind of come to mind. I'm sure that I'm going to have a whole bunch that I'll email you with after this is over.
Well, it's a good tie-in with Tony Gwynn Jr. because I love Tony. He played for the Albuquerque Isotopes.
I had a T-shirt of them for a while.
Why don't you still have a T-shirt of the Isotopes?
Because I wore it to the point where it became so thin that it was like my wife said, it's the shirt or you. One of them has to go.
You made the right decision. I'm going to send you a new T-shirt of the Albuquerque Isotopes.
I appreciate it. Extra large.
So, yes, Tony Gwynn Jr., outstanding. The alum that I want to brag about this week, speaking of the Padres, his name is Jeff Pratt. And he has worked off and on for the Padres since 1997. And these days, he is the director of scoreboard operations, which means everything that happens up on that big, huge video board, he's ultimately in charge of hiring the people who work on that. And he's been with the Padres for a long, long time. He's an SDSU alum, a journalism alum. Jeff Pratt, we're going to get him on the podcast one day. He hires a whole lot of people to work for the Padres up in that video board. All right, David. Appreciate your time. This was very enlightening. Any last final words of wisdom before we wrap things up?
San Diego State has access to the best carne asada burritos in the world. A good carne asada burrito has carne asada, guacamole, a little bit of salsa fresca. It does not have rice and beans. It does not. You can get that on the side.
That's the perfect way to end this week's podcast. He is David Moye. I am Josh Suchon. Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person, or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.